Thank you.
Thank you, Javed. That's 20 quid, by the way. Good afternoon, everybody. As we said, lunchtime session. I'm a former professional stage hypnotist, so I actually don't mind putting you all to sleep. So enjoy the session. I'll wake you up at the end. The book signing's over there. It's only 20 quid when we get there, so don't worry about that as well. Okay, so I was doing a talk yesterday in Oslo, actually, and it wasn't until about 5 minutes into the conversation when I was talking about this role of the CISO that somebody put their hand up and said, "What's a CISO?" So, lesson learnt. I'm going to be talking about the Chief Information Security Officer here today, just in case we have anybody who's not quite sure. So, CISO, Defenders of the Realm, will be mentioning this. Why not? I'm here, right? So, we'll talk a little bit about some of the findings that went into the research with the book, plus some other stuff. I'll give you a little bit of my background and history in a second, just to set the scene a little bit more in terms of who I am and what right have I got to write a book about things like CISOs. So I'll cover that in a second. Okay, so CISOs, Defenders of the Cyber Realm, that's the title that I eventually ended up with on the book. There was a couple of others that we thought about throughout the process. These things are never me on my own, by the way. There's lots of people involved in producing and getting this book together, so I'm very grateful to all of those. Some are in the room for pulling this together over the last 3 years, actually. So, title of the topic is, one hack from the sack. Seems kind of appropriate, as one or two of the people we interviewed in the book are no longer there for reasons that may be obvious and become obvious as we go through the talk. But what I really want to talk about is this whole role, deconstructed. Who are CISOs? What is it they do, etc. So a quick quiz before we start. This is just to make sure you are awake after lunch. Anybody who knows who this guy is? The guy with the red tie on. There's no points for the other guy, okay? But the guy with the red tie on. Anybody know who that is? Who said that? Vince Sir. Okay. Prize for you here, sir. We'll give you that later. Okay. Save me coming all the way down the back. That was, I got you. Thanks. Yeah, Vince Sir. So who was Vince Sir? And anybody that's got the book, please don't shout out now, because it is kind of mentioned. Vint did the foreword for the book for me, which I was very, very pleased and proud to get. But MD able to tell us who Vint is, what he did, what's he famous for?
Grandfather of the internet.
Yeah, father of the internet, grandfather. Yeah, he's getting on a bit now, isn't he? Yeah. So, father of the internet. So it's all his fault, right? We wouldn't be sat here today, I guess, if it wasn't for Vint Cerf. He, along with Bob Kahn, his colleague, invented the IP address and TCP IP way back in the late 70s. So, Vint Cerf, father of the internet. I do need to update that to grandfather now that I've heard that, though. This guy, I'm sure we're all very aware of. Somebody said it. Sir Tim Berners-Lee, well done, whoever said that. And finally, this guy looks like he's caught like a rabbit in the headlines, which might be very appropriate for the rest of the talk. Any idea who this might be? 10,000 Marks and Spencer's Smarty Points, if you can guess who this is. Okay. This is a chap called Steve Katz. Steve was the very first CISO. So I guess we could call him father of the CISO role, keeping that trend going. Or grandfather of the CISO role, now that we've changed it all. So yeah, Steve Katz, and again, Steve was interviewed and did a whole chapter for me in the book in terms of, what's life like now and how's it changed since he first came on board, and that was quite interesting. Lots of change, since 1995 to today. I don't have to tell you guys, right, how much has changed in the marketplace in that time. So a very different role today from when Steve first started. So 2 out of 3 are all interviewed in the book or helped out with the book. I've still got to get to Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He's the only Brit there. You think that would have been an easier one, right? But, the other 2 are from the other side of the pond. Okay, so my background, I am former military, and secure communications was my game. So I've been at this for a long time now. Feels like a long time as well. I was formerly with CIOP, working with Jim Gamble there, so at the sharp end, serious organised crime, breaking up international crime gangs and that sort of thing online. So very come at this from the sharp end of dealing with internet crime and things like that. Former Chief Cyber Strategist for Hewlett-Packard, and I worked as Group CISO, and in fact I still do. I work for organisations now, one or two I'm going to mention as we go through here. So today I'm at Avon Communications, which is quite interesting, as their global CISO. Interesting in as much as we have 6 million independent reps out there, or as I call them, 6 million BYODs. So yeah, quite a lot to deal with and contend with there on that side. Plus one or two other organisations. I tend to work these days more at board level and helping boards understand the challenges of cybersecurity and asking the CISO, the incumbent CISOs, what they're doing and helping them to achieve what they need to help. So that kind of advisory piece is something I find myself doing more and more of these days. And I guess writing a book kind of helps position you as somebody who can do that sort of stuff. So it kind of was very useful from that perspective.
What's the barcode?
Sorry?
What's the barcode?
Well, the barcode, I've got no idea. It just seemed like a good idea to put a barcode under my picture. I'll ask my marketing department, but good question. Yeah, that threw me. Okay, and I've won a few awards, for which I'm very grateful for along the way as well. I kind of like to start my presentations with this view, this single view really. And there's lots happening here, because this is kind of society operating normally. It's what's going on out there today. Lots of movement, lots of activity, the lights are on, the banks are coughing out money, well, if you've got any in there to take out, but hopefully if you have, it's easy to get. There's fuel in the petrol stations, the traffic lights are working, all these smart buildings are there talking to each other and all operating effectively. People are walking around with their internet devices connected to wherever, and we're obviously tracking all of that stuff because, this thing here knows me better than I do. I've got no idea where I was 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, 3 minutes and 3 seconds ago. This does, which is an interesting dilemma for all of us. I was listening to a bit on the radio this morning, LBC coming up here, and Jamie Oliver has apparently been saying that he's put some tracking code and a piece of software onto his kids' mobile phones so he can track where they are 24/7. His kids are like 15, 16, that sort of age. And the whole debate was around, is that a good thing to do or not? I have my own views about privacy, and privacy is featured quite strongly in the book as well. So have a look at that. But yeah, here we have a normal scene, everybody going around their business, and of course, the big fear is that happens. There is a city there behind that dark screen, for those that can't quite see the image at the back. The lights go out, things shut down, there's no food on the shelves, the banks aren't coughing out any cash, the lights aren't coming on, the fuel isn't being transported around the country to top up our generators to keep our servers going. That's all kind of stopped. What would it feel like for just a moment to be living in that world? I think it's fair to say it would be quite a shock, right, to the system, particularly for us in the Western world, where we're kind of used to being able to pick up a phone, switch on a machine and find out what's happening in the world. There are certain parts of the world that could probably cope with that situation much better than us right now. We wouldn't cope very well. Okay? How far away are we from something like that happening, or how easily could that happen? Well, one would like to think that it's quite difficult to do, right? That the energy companies, for example, are fairly resilient and fairly robust. Possibly. Yesterday my talk was to the Scandinavian energy industry, and one of the companies I represent I'll talk to you about in a second. And when a tree falls on a line, for example, during the winter, they very quickly find routes and are able to bring the power and the electric back on pretty quickly. So, the energy grid is very, very resilient, right, against single point type issues and failures. You know, the challenge is how resilient is it once we get massive attacks, and I guess that's kind of untested. So yeah, I've been working with this organization now. I've been CISO actually, CISO here for about 18 months, 2 years for an organization in Norway, up in Trondheim, for anybody that knows Norway. And you know, our northern borders are on the bordering with Russia. Norway is the second biggest supplier of energy into Europe. I'm mapping the energy grids around the world, including nation states where certain organizations would be interested in seeing what that looks like. So do I have a job to do there as a CISO? You bet. Okay, so there is people on our radar who are very interested in getting to the crown jewels of the organization, if that makes sense. So here we're codifying the world's energy grids. You know, how do we make it more efficient? So the job of the company is writing critical asset infrastructure, technology, and software for energy trading, green energy trading, that type of stuff. So not only is it about mapping the grids, but it's also about controlling the way energy flows around the grid. Okay? So high-value assets, right? Depending on what your modus operandi might be and why you might be interested in that kind of data. So this was a little saying that I found not so long back, you know, 9 meals from anarchy. That's really how long it takes before society would start to break down. So the lights went out, we ended up with that black screen. We're only 9 meals away from things really getting into a difficult situation. 9 meals, 3 days. Okay, after 3 days, throw in a bit of misinformation, a bit of false news, and you soon start to create a situation that is challenging for society. Hopefully, we'll never ever get here, but that's our job, right? Is to stop these things happening. That's why we're here today and talking about these things. So, you know, I feel privileged to be standing in a room talking to you guys, because you keep the lights on. From different angles and different perspectives, perhaps. So, you know, this isn't a new saying. This guy actually coined this phrase, Alfred Henry Lewis, back in 1906, the turn of the century. So, you know, it's a concern that's been around for quite a long time. I do wonder if it's still 3 days. I'm sure, you know, if somebody was really to bring down critical infrastructure, that it might actually be quite fast these days and quicker before we start to see some real issues and some real problems. Yeah, many of you will know Shodan. Any users of Shodan in the yeah, a few Shodan users around. So, I mean, this looks like it might be an outbreak of smallpox or something, right? It looks more like it's a medical graph of the flu going around the world or something, a virus. But actually what Shodan does, it's a bit like Google for hackers, I guess is the way I would describe it. My son here, Alex, has just done his certified ethical hacking exams and stuff, and he loves this. So he's in there, you know, very curious, finding open cameras and things like that. I'm very worried about him. You know, I have to have a word with his parents, but he's in there looking at cameras and finding ICS systems and traffic lights and, you know, SCADA systems, all openly exposed on the internet. So, you know, this is a web crawler, mapping protocols, raw direct internet access to, you know, exposed industrial control systems. So I look at the world these days as a CISO, not just of where's the challenge in the information space, but also where's the challenge in the operational technology space as well. Building management systems, for example. Target were hacked through their BMS. So it's no longer just about IT and data for me. Losing a few credit cards or millions of credit card details is very, very bad. But the lights going out and the electricity coming down is a real concern. I've just zoomed in on that there, by the way. If I had a rash like that, I'd be at the doctor tomorrow, right? It doesn't look good. Lots of red on them. So technology is important. You know, the systems and tools that we all use. You know, how many CISOs in the room today? Got a few CISOs. I spoke to a few earlier on. Yeah, congratulations, welcome. Why do you do it? I don't know. Let's have a chat about that in a second. But technology is there to help us. It does help us. It's very important because as human beings, clearly, with all the information and the data that's flowing around, it's impossible for us to keep on top of all that. So For example, I like to ensure that I've got a very clear picture of my networks, not just my IT networks, but my OT networks as well. Because, as we all know here, it doesn't really matter as a bad guy how I can hack your systems, whether I can do it through social engineering, walking through the front door, whatever it might be. You know, that's what I'll do in order to get in there, and from a digital perspective as well. So if I can hack an IoT device, that's what I'll do. And quite often I hear from my architects that we've got good segregation across the network. Don't worry, Mike, we're okay. Show me. Prove it to me. Test it, you know, let's have a look at it. I want to know if there's a point of ingress. I don't know if this thing works. Yeah. So if, for example, something's breached over here, I want to know what are the hot points. You know, how can that hacker get across my network and my organization? How quick can they do that? How can I stop it? How can I contain it? So I need a good, clear map of all of that. So these are the sort of things that I find myself working more and more on these days in my roles as a CISO, but also the cloud, the virtual networks, and other aspects of it as well. So yeah, complete network visibility and access, I want that. The whole OT, IT vulnerability management piece, I want that. You know, is there WannaCry in my system? Where is it? Let's find it, let's patch it, let's sort it out. I want to be able to detect threats before they actually become risks. So I want to be able to see stuff coming over the horizon and lock things down and make sure that it doesn't do any damage. And these days I do see the regulators as, in some instances, just as big an issue as hackers in my world. You know, the fines, GDPR, NIST directive type stuff come with some quite big fines. So, you know, add that on top of the cost of a breach, and it can bring a company down, right? So all of these things are a major concern in my space. But what I really want to focus on today is these guys, the people, the Chief Information Security Officer. Now, the technology is important, but how important is this person that we're assigning this role to and these responsibilities to? So that's what the book was really all about. You know, it was focusing on that. The online world, the cyber realm. It's called Dirty Deeds, Hackers and Heroes. That's because I spoke to a movie guy and he told me you've got to have the upfront dirty deeds, you know, set the scene, what's wrong, what's not going right. And that's the script for, what was it, one of the movies? It was a Spielberg movie anyway, I can't remember exactly what it was. But he started off with this, setting the scene, then you have the bad guys, you know, and what they're doing, and then you have your heroes coming in to clean it all up and save the world type scenario. So, hands up, I followed that kind of format, you know. So, throughout the book, I was speaking to hackers. I was very pleased that I actually managed to get some to speak to me. To do so, they would only do it remotely. I have no idea who they were. They were using disguised voices and that type of thing. I was asking questions that they wouldn't answer, things that I was just seeking to kind of identify who they were, like, can I ask how old you are? No. Which part of the world do you live in? Somewhere near water? You know, those types of answers. So, you know, I was really trying to get into the heads of these guys, and the people I spoke to were often quite young. And even though the voices were disguised, in the answers, you know, you build a profile and you get a picture of who you're speaking to. And one of my questions was, you know, what's the biggest hack you've done? Which one are you most proud of? And you know, some of what they were doing was clearly illegal. And I've had to be careful how I transmit that in the book for obvious reasons. So there was that bit. Then there's the victims. You know, what's the impact of being hacked? You know, your identity stolen. What's it like to live with that? How easy is it to clean it up? And so we spoke to some victims. And then interviewing lots of, not just CISOs, but CTOs, ICOs, CEOs across industry to get a perception on how they view and how important they see cybersecurity. Somebody did tell me, in fact, I think this was Raj Samani from McAfee, chief scientist, said to me, you know, Mike, why do you want to be a CISO? You know, what does it stand for? Career is so over. CISO. did make me sit back and think for a minute. The other name that I was going to give the book was One Hack from the Sack. But unfortunately, I ran that past a few Americans, and it has a very different connotation in America than it does here in the UK. They didn't get it at all. So, and I'm hoping to sell a few over there, as you might expect. So the journey then, meeting the CISO, real people, real challenges. That's what I wanted to get to, the heart of these individuals who are doing this job. Why do you do it? The human side of the role, the personalities behind the title. Because generally, some organizations have more than one, but typically there's only one group CISO out there who's responsible for a lot of this stuff. Improving the general understanding of what a CISO does. I speak to lots of CISOs, get lots of different feedback in terms of what their key roles and responsibilities are and the way they approach the job. It's different things to different people in different industries. If I think of a chief financial officer and I write a job spec for a CFO, what does that look like compared to what a CISO job spec might look like? There's quite a lot of disparity in terms of the structure and how we pull those things together. The target operating model, who does the CISO report to? Quite often it's into CTOs. Sometimes the CIO, not very often the CEO, chief risk officers. Again, the operating models vary quite a lot across organizations, countries as well. But most of all, I really wanted to just champion the position. I wanted a book where a CISO could pick it up, give it to his chief executive. The chief executive could read it and make sense of it. So it's non-technical jargon. It is written for the chief executives, or any management individuals out there to pick it up and understand what the hell's going on around cybersecurity. And apparently I've got 5 minutes left, so I need to speed up a little bit. So who are they? What do they actually do? And why do we need them? All of those things are discussed in the book at length, so please dive into them. I do make myself very accessible. In fact, I've set up a website around this stuff as well, so if there's anything you want to discuss, there's additional areas within the website so we can collaborate and talk and discuss all these things. Some of the interview examples, these sort of organizations are all input in, so we've got people from manufacturing, retail, banking, all across different areas of the network looking at the issues here. So one of the first things I did was to map the role. And we did the old mind mapping approach, and surprisingly, it kept growing, it kept growing, it kept growing. So when you look at the job spec of a CISO across industry now, it's like everything plus the kitchen sink. The things that we're asked to cover and look after, it's quite extensive and quite large. So, there was 12 core areas, over 70 subdomains within the role of the CISO. So make sense of that lot. So the first thing that I went out and do was capture the role. What do people think they do? Average tenure, current career. I'm building a picture of that CISO role, and then being able to map that against peers to see what that looks like. This is all free, by the way, and you can access this on the Ascot Barclay website. So that's the individual, fingerprinting the CISO role. And we found essentially that there were 5 key areas or styles, 4 key styles actually, 5 key areas. So there's the strategists, the guys that focus on helping organizations to define their cyber strategy, those that are in advisory, like the role I described earlier, those doing the operational stuff, perhaps running SOCs and day-to-day operational NOCs and all that sort of stuff, and many, many, many coming from a technical background, as you might expect. And then the next thing we thought, well, if we've got a good idea of what a CISO skill set looks like, can we match that to the organization? So what does the footprint of the organization in terms of what we're asking our CISOs to do look like? And here, again, we looked at capturing those against certain key areas. So management and leadership, measurement, monitoring, mitigation and maintain, the 5 M's as I call them. I take a very simple approach to helping companies. And we measure against these 5 M's ongoing. So the leadership piece is setting the strategy, setting the policy, getting the right target operating model in place, having the CISOs report to the right level, measuring the estate, what does it look like, benchmarking it against industry and internally. Monitoring, very important. I mentioned earlier the oversight of the network. then mitigating any issues we find. And obviously, we never arrive in this industry, do we? It's always a journey. Everything's changing. You know, the threat landscape changes, the legislative landscape changes, the organization's changing constantly. So we're on a constant wheel of maintaining and monitoring. So bringing that all together, it's really about mapping the CISO role, whether the organization and where it is in its journey towards hacker-hardened and full security scenario, and do you need a strategist, a technologist, or another style of CISO at this point? Or maybe just to support whoever the incumbent CISO is right now with a different skill set, a different view of the world, to bring that more robust view of things. Okay, so just finishing off now, you'll be very glad to hear. Back to my 5 M's. Management, who's doing the job? The CISO. Who is the CISO? What are their skills? What are you asking them to do? How do we measure what they are doing? Budgets, all the rest of it. How are we monitoring this holy state? What we can see, we can do something about. I kind of look at my role as a little bit like, you know, standing on top of the mountain and looking at the battlefield down below and seeing what's going on. I was going to use Napoleon, but that kind of sets up a different kind of perception of things. But yeah, just like in Napoleon days, being able to look down across the battlefield and see where things are and move things around and resources accordingly and mitigate where I need to. So that's it really. It's coming to actually 3 minutes before my time is up. I'm very happy to take any questions that you may have. Before I do, also you might want to have a quick look at the IOTSA, the Operational Technology Security Association. For anybody that's interested in operational technology, I like to do all this communication, collaboration stuff, bringing people together to discuss issues so that we can address them together as a community, and that's what the IOTSA does. Please take a look at it and think about joining that as well. Okay, so any questions? There are prizes. Yes, sir. Take.
When you're interviewing.
Second.
Okay.
Yep. You go first.
When you're interviewing miscreants, did you take any precautions to protect yourself in terms of you getting targeted and all that?
Yeah. So the question was when I was interviewing the hackers. What was the word you used?
Miscreants.
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 Okay. Whatever that word was. Dodgy geezers. Yeah. When I was interviewing dodgy geezers, hackers, did I take any precautions to protect myself? I was really concerned about that, to be quite honest, and I still am, you know, because they're out there in the book right now. And you know, I think when you do something like this, then clearly you do expose yourself to those types of guys. So I was very careful, and I was trying to obviously look after and protect the sources of my information as well, just like a journalist would do, I guess. So yeah, but I was very conscious of that. Sorry, there was a question at the back there.
So I think we kind of joke about, you know, the tenure of CISOs being, you know, as short as 18 months in some cases.
Yeah.
With the interviews you had, do you see that being true? And if so, is it typically a result of a breach, or are there other reasons at play?
Yeah, well, a couple of really good points came out from that. I think number one is I was seeing the average tenure was a little bit longer than that. You know, probably in the 2 to 3 year range would be my perception, at least from the target group that I was working with. You know, so they were career CISOs, typically. 1 or 2 people that we did, and I did mention it earlier, did lose their jobs following a breach. Now, that might have been that they were actually kicked out of the organization, or they were moved sideways into other roles, one and the same thing, right? So, yeah, that did happen. We did see that. But the average tenure was certainly, you know, a little bit longer. Here's one question I did ask, which, you know, I always thought was really quite interesting and poignant from my perspective. And the question was, if during your watch, as the CISO, there was a major breach of your organization, would you feel personally responsible for that breach? What do you think the answer was? How many people would say, yes, I would feel personally responsible? Okay, have a look around. Yeah, we can see, I don't know, maybe 15, 20% of the audience. 21% now. Thank you. So, you know, about 20% of the audience. And I think that was kind of reflective. In fact, it was probably more the other way, that it was probably less. Most did not feel that they would be responsible. And I kind of started off thinking, well, actually, I'm ex-military, so I would feel fully responsible. If it happened on my watch, it's my fault, right? That's where I was coming from when I first started this. But in speaking to the guys, what they were saying is, look, I don't actually own the risk. The business owns the risk. If the business is not giving me the money, the resources, the tools, the technology to do what I'm asking them to do, why is that my responsibility? There is a counter-argument to that, which is, well, if you're the CISO, you need to speak up, be brave, kick ass, and get what you need. So there's a kind of two-way cycle in that thing. We all need jobs, right? You can only push it so far. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed my talk, and it's great to meet you.